in this example, I want to look at how we're going to access DynamoDB locally from a Windows PowerShell instance. And it's really meant to highlight the syntax differences that you'll see within PowerShell in a Windows environment. So I have DynamoDB on my local install up and running, so it's running through this command prompt. And then I also have a PowerShell prompt set up so that I can run PowerShell commands against DynamoDB. So the first command that I just want to execute is I want to get a listing of the tables that are on the local instance. So I'm going to do AWS DynamoDB, and the command is list tables. And then I want to do that against my local instance, so the parameter that I'm going to have to pass is the endpoint URL. So the endpoint URL is going to be http localhost:8000. Okay, and you'll see the line continuation character here in PowerShell is that backtick. Okay, and then this endpoint URL, since we're going to run all these commands against our local machine, I'm just going to copy that to my clipboard before I execute it, and then I will go ahead and execute that command. Okay, and you'll notice that we get my baseball stats table on my local machine, so that baseball stats table exists. The next command that I want to execute is I want to verify that there's data in that table. So I've already seeded the table, but I just want to verify that that table has data. So I'm going to issue a scan command. So I'm going to do an AWS DynamoDB scan. And then the parameters that I need to pass are the table name, being baseball stats. And then the other parameter that I need to pass is that endpoint URL, which I had on my clipboard, so I'm just pasting it in. So I'm able to scan, and what you'll see is that I have my data set there, and I can hit enter through it to go line by line through the data set, or I can hit my space bar, and that'll page by page go through the data set until I end up with my 23 records that I care about. Okay, so I can clear the screen. So I'm able to do a scan command. Okay, and what I'm going to do is each of these commands, I'm just going to go ahead and save. Okay, so right here is my list tables command. And what I want to do is I actually want to copy that. So I'm actually going to just create a simple text file, and then I'll share the text file through Slack, so you'll have that text file. I'm just going to go ahead and open up Notepad, and then I want to copy and paste this command. So the first command that we issued was the list tables, and then the second command that we issued was our scan command. So I'm copying that and bringing it over to a text file. Okay, we can still scan, that's not a problem. Okay, and now the next command that I want to run is a query command. So I'm going to do an AWS DynamoDB query. And our query is going to be based on a key value. So we're going to have a key condition expression. Okay, so our key condition expression is going to be tmyd equal to some parameter t, and that parameter t we're going to define in our expression attribute values. Okay, and our expression attribute values is going to be JSON, so we're going to define :t, and :t is going to be some JSON object, and that JSON object is a string that has a value. I'm just going to go ahead and say player info underscore LAA. So all of the players that play for the Los Angeles Angels. Okay, so this looks like the correct JSON that I want to include, but it has to be in quotes, And because it has to be in quotes, then these double quotes are going to have to be escaped. And the way PowerShell is going to handle this is the outer quotes have to be single quotes. Okay, so I have single quotes around the outer quotes. That's the beginning and ending of the string. And then the inner quotes, if I actually want them to be literal double quotes, I have to escape them with the backslash character. Okay, and then the last thing we have to do, I'm going to backtick to do a line continuation, is I have to include that endpoint URL to point at my local machine. Okay, and if we do that, AWS DynamoDB query, that all looks okay to me, so I'm not sure. I missed the table name parameter. So one thing that's nice about DynamoDB is that your parameter order is not important. So I can come through and I can say, we're doing this query against our table name, which is baseball stats. Okay, and it looks like we're missing a missed key schema element. I think I might have a typo with the team ID. And I'm hitting the back arrow. I can't hit the up arrow because if I hit the up arrow, it'll go to the previous command. Okay, and I'll go back to that command just to kind of show you what I corrected. I had a lowercase d for the team ID, and the team ID is case sensitive, so it looks like that was the issue that I had. So we're able to do a query, but the syntax is a little bit different than other environments in that if I have to include a literal double quote, I want to escape that double quote, but in order to escape that double quote, I have to start the string in PowerShell with a single quote. Okay, so I've copied that to the clipboard, and then I'll go ahead and paste that query command. So it looks like we're getting 4 records from that query. Okay, so if I hit the space bar, I'm getting all of the players that belong to the Los Angeles Angels. So let's say I wanted to do a combination of the two. So right now we're able to do scans and queries. I want to do the same query, but then I also want to do a filter statement. Okay, so I want to do a filter statement, which is going to make this a little bit more complicated in that my expression attribute values are also going to have a filter expression. And for the purpose of this example, what I want to do is I want to first get all the players that belong to the Angels, and then I want to do a secondary filter to say I only care about the player whose name is Cole Calhoun. Okay, so that's what I want to run. So I'll escape out of that. I'm just going to go over to this example, and I'm going to manipulate it a little bit. I'm just going to change the order a little bit. So I want to do this query with the key condition expression, the expression attribute values, the endpoint URL. I'm going to move up the table name. So I'm just going to grab this, and I'm going to move that up. I'm just changing the order of the parameters a little bit. I'm also going to move up this endpoint URL. Okay, and then lastly, what I want to do is I want to add a filter expression. And the filter expression is going to be player name equal to colon player. Okay, the colon player, I used colon T for the team ID. The question usually comes up is it convention to use a single character? No, it's not a single. It's not a convention. So this could certainly be team, and this could certainly be player. It's just a variable name is all it is. So I'm setting up a variable called player and a variable called T. And I'm just going to have those two variables, and then my expression attribute values are going to have to change. So I want to look at those expression attribute values, and I'm going to bring this over to PowerShell. and we can go from there. Okay, so I've pasted all of that in, okay, with the one key concern being that I now have this JSON. Okay, this JSON will provide the value for :t, but then I need a second value for :player. Okay, so the way it's set up right now is that I have this outer JSON for :t. That's kind of the first key value pair. The second key value pair would be for the player. I have a very hard time working with the syntax inside of PowerShell with JSON in terms of the escape characters and things like that. What I would suggest when you're first getting started is figure out what JSON you want to actually use. So I'm just going to start with that. I'm going to figure out what the JSON is. So I want to pass some object that has two parameters, :t and :player. Okay, so I'm going to say here's :t. It's the value of some object. And then I'll have a second parameter, which is :player, which is also some object. Okay, so that's the correct syntax so far. Then I can go back through and define what :t is. :t is actually a string that has a value of player info underscore LAA. And then player is an object that has a value of, it's a string that has a value of Cole Calhoun. Okay, so this is kind of a tedious process, but it usually works out better for me syntactically. So I think this is the correct JSON that I want. Then I want to make sure that this JSON is included in single quotes. So there's my closing quote, and then I'm going to scroll all the way to the beginning to get my starting quote. And then in between here, I have to escape all of the double quotes with a backslash, so I'm just going to go through and do that. So I'm just arrowing through this, making sure that I have an escape character before each double quote. Okay, and the syntax is pretty burdensome, but we'll get through it. And if I've done this correctly, what we should have is we should be querying for all the players that belong to the Angels. So that's the 4 records. But then we're looking for a specific player whose player name is Cole Calhoun, which should then take us down to a single record if the syntax is correct. So I'm going to go ahead and execute this. And it looks like the syntax was correct there. So we're able to do a query and filter all together. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this command to the clipboard and bring it over to this text file. So we get an example of how to do a query and filter. Okay, if I want to do a scan and filter, okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and escape out of this. I'm going to do an AWS DynamoDB scan. Okay, the table name being baseball stats. The endpoint URL being my local machine, so localhost 8000. And then I'm going to have a filter expression. So my filter expression, let's go with the same filter expression. So the player name, so player name equal to :p. Okay, and then I'm going to then have to supply the value of that filter expression. So I'm going to have an expression attribute values, which is going to be some JSON object again, where I'm defining what :p is, and :p is an object that's a string that has a value of Cole Calhoun. Okay, so I'm pretty consistent with how I set this up, in that I need beginning and ending quotes around this. I need to escape the double quotes. and then I'm going to close the single quote. So now I'm doing a scan and a filter. Okay, and you'll notice that I looked at all 23 records and then I filtered down to just the one whose player name matched, Cole Calhoun. So this is an example of a scan and filter inside PowerShell accessing DynamoDB locally. Okay, so some syntactic differences within PowerShell, with the line continuation character being the backtick, having to escape double quotes. We're putting that inside of single quotes to make that happen. But ultimately, the parameters are the same, whether we're using a key condition expression, expression attribute values, or a filter expression. All of those parameters that we're using with scans, queries, and filters are the same across the board.